is acceptable even from where they come. So we become part of this sanctuary, this space where people can begin to speak even in the most difficult questions that relate to themselves. I mean, I remember a lot of conversations being asked, Kenyans, what is it that makes you? So now you are in a broad-based government. I say, yes, we are. Just as we shook hands a couple of years ago. And people can't quite understand this. What is this? What is this theory about? But we are also transforming our approach from reactive interventions to proactive interventions. And increasingly, we are beginning to step up to asking fundamental first-order questions that can help in a preventative manner, because we believe that the realization of our own national objectives and our destiny will depend increasingly on a more secure neighborhood within proximate to us geographically and beyond. And therefore, it is important that we become proactive, that we incentivize preventive measures. And this is happening within a character of which has been theorized as a very volatile situation, a situation which is characterized by fragility, protracted crises, long-term peace processes. Sometimes I'm told that the peace processes don't end. We are told we are in a situation of perpetual transitions. But in all this, in this complex environment, we see opportunities. I recall when somebody asked me, how can you be the ones leading the charge for the DRC election in 2008? And we said, because we need to build block on block. Because democracy is a process. It is not perfect. Because we have to encourage the right normative values. And they said, and so you are also taking the DRC to the East African community? And we said, yes, because 50 million Kenyans is not sufficient to fulfill the potential of our region. And that is the reason why we were also championed, and we championed the membership of Somalia into the EAC. Because it is important that we share the common norms that underwrite a common destiny in the region. So this is what is driving us. So in the light of this, our toolkit has also expanded beyond what began as the traditional military approaches. We have learned that sustainable peace is built not through force, but through soft power, through dialogue, persistent engagement, canvassing, sharing values, and addressing fundamental root causes of the conflict. And that is why when our president takes over the chair of the EAC as he has, we are looking at integration as a soft power mechanism to push for common good as a way of preventive action as far as diplomacy is concerned. And so we stand here, and that is why we stand here as a resolute country. We stand here as a country that has actually forged a peacemaking doctrine that is broadening in terms of the toolkit that we have, that is encompassing a normative framework of values for preventive action, that is driving for prosperity in terms of the integration agenda. And that is why, for us, integration is just not an EAC thing. It's not just about signing an EPA with the EU. It's about the SCFTA. It's about reforming the WTO. It's about global prosperity. It's about campaigning for the common good in terms of climate action. And so we have a duty, we have a history that has shaped the identity of Kenya and its diplomacy. From participant, from a norm taker to a norm shaper. I think you're at a point where we must boldly help to shape the new norms. As we speak to questions of reform, it must come with the normative framework and the practice, driven by the practice that we have had from independence. And so quickly, I think I want to propose that we are at a good point in terms of this aspiration for bold action for the next 60 years, and that this must be underpinned by the boldness of the leadership of this country. If we are going to project President William Ruto's foreign policy, it has got to be visionary. It has got to be bold. It has got to be courageous. It has got to be people-oriented. It has got to be anchored in democratic imperatives. And I think this is absolutely important. So this turning point then, this watershed, must be a point at which we imagine Kenya's diplomatic leadership into the future, starting with a very perilous context today. But what does that mean? In a complex situation, in a crisis situation, the leadership that is required and called upon, it's the bold, business not usual leadership. And this is what this next space must look like. And I think the seeds are there. We have been known as being led by the immutable principles, Pan-Africanism, Pan-African solidarity, self-determination, freedom. And this is why we are in Haiti. And everybody kept on asking us, Haiti? Do you know where Haiti is? Why Haiti? Why Haiti? Because we are Kenya. We believe in self-determination. We believe in freedom. We believe that the Haitian people have a similar right like any other person. And we believe it is the responsibility of everyone who believes in freedom and dignity to support Haiti. And that is why we are in Haiti. We believe in creating an enabling environment for global good. And that is why the president has been in the forefront of the climate action arena. That is why he has been pushing for integration. That is why he's been pushing for the new future, whether it is in terms of technology here, and how we translate technology for Kenyans, for Africans not to be technology takers, but to be technology definers, so that all these discussions around AI are driven, not like the colonial project, but we are participants in defining the parameters of technology and how that brings to us prosperity. That is why we are focused on deepening the democratic credentials. Now, there's a lot of theory about Africa not wanting democracy because democracy can't deliver. But it is true that everywhere you go in Africa and beyond, people are desirous of freedom, of respect, of participation, of defining the manner in which they are governed. That is democracy, and that is what we are looking for. Because we believe in that environment, you have the best chance of realizing your full potential. That is why we continue to lead on the big global agenda, counterterrorism. You will know that our nation has been at the forefront, not just in terms of responding to terrorist threats, but also in defining the structures and parameters for dealing with violent extremism, with radicalization. Kenya was among the first country in the summit on countering violent extremism in 2015, and we drove the development of the counterterrorism centers across the world, not just on the African continent. It is this leadership that we are called to in the next 60 years in terms of setting the norms, in terms of responding, and in terms of creating the parameters for all of us to work together. And therefore, I see today as the day to candidly examine. There have been shortfalls, as there would be anywhere else. But I think it is important to focus on the vision, on the aspiration, and to draw the lessons of the past in order to catapult us to better understanding and a shared prosperity. And therefore, I'm very, very delighted to be part of this morning and to listen in to my senior colleagues that are here, to friends that I have met after a long while, and to be part of a department, of a ministry of colleagues that have forged my career within government. I thank you for your kind attention.
Another clap for Ambassador Juma. Indeed, I don't think anybody could have put it better. regional integration as a soft power weapon of Kenya's diplomacy. Really good summary. That we're moving forward, we must be visionary, bold, and people-centered, and move also with a lot of self-determination. And she was quoting our president. And the many things she has said. Now I take credit to that. You see how good I am? She told me I take credit for everything. Now I have taken all the credit for that. Now, after that very powerful speech presentation, there is one person I did not introduce because he's not here on the podium, but he's also a very, very important Kenyan. Many of you know him. Maybe some of our young students may not know him. And he is His Excellency Erastus Moencha, who has served in very senior capacities, not just here in Kenya, but especially in Africa, who has represented us, if you remember, 2 terms in a row as the Deputy Secretary General, the Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, which is where our very own His Excellency Raila Odinga is trying to take that slot. But he had done a lot of things for this country, and he is online, I'm hoping, even as I'm introducing him, because he's the one who is going to speak next. He was also the Secretary General of COMESA at one point, and he played a very crucial role in the championing and crafting of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is a very important flagship for the whole continent on matters trade. And he played very important roles also in the negotiations of the ongoing Doha round in the WTO, of which Kenya is a major participant along with the rest of Africa. He has also helped this country, in regard to the now continuing discussions on the economic partnership agreement between Africa and various individual countries and the EU, which was supposed to take over from the Cotonou Agreement, which expired quite some time back. Mr. Moncha, without a doubt, everybody would accept from his work, those who know him, is a dedicated Pan-Africanist and a strong advocate for African regional integration. And I'm sure he's going to add some substance to what has, the Ambassador Dr. Monica Juma has said about African regional integration. And of course, he's a recipient of many honors and awards, not just national, but globally. So, he's right there. I can see him. Mr. Moencha, can you hear us? Excellency, can you hear us? You are muted. I don't know, we give him a few minutes to get sorted. And as we wait, in case some of you don't know, currently he's the chair of Equity Bank, the second largest bank in Kenya. He's also chair of the Africa Capacity Building Foundation. Some of you know that foundation is a think tank for the Africa region, etc. So, Excellency, have you managed to sort out the problem? Still trying. We need to hear him, and maybe we could.
You can now?
Yes, we can now hear you.
Okay, thank you so much.
And you have the floor.
Well, let me thank you. Okay.
So,
well, let me thank you, moderator, for your very generous introduction, but also proceed to thank the ministry and in particular His Excellency Musalia Mudavadi for his opening remarks that have really put in context the subject that we're going to discuss this morning and this afternoon, and also for organizing this meeting. May I also acknowledge and appreciate my predecessors that have spoken. And so I will just delve into the subject. I don't know how much time it is so that I can context my remarks within that time. Would I be right in perhaps requiring so that I don't overstep my boundaries? How much time do I have? 5 minutes? 10 minutes?
You see what I said? I have been negotiating. Yeah. Let me look at the faces, whether that's a yes. I think I'll use the powers of the moderator. Yes, I will give you an extra 5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very well taken. I think the question this morning that has been asked and answered by the speakers that have taken the floor is why, how, and what integration is about, and also diplomacy. And may I quickly then proceed to say, for regional integration, Kenya has participated, and regional integration takes place within the context of economic gains, which means you engage in regional integration because of efficiency, shared costs for public goods, economies of scale for goods and services, but also overcoming divisions. Regional integration is also about industrial growth. It is about peace and security. Global, and also it is a step towards global integration. And as I asked the technical team that is helping me to move the slides, please keep up with my speed. I should then here continue to say, Kenya, in terms of regional and continental integration, joined the African Union in 1963, 6 days barely after Kenya gained independence. And that is, the African Union itself was established on the 25th of May 1963, and Kenya gained as an independent state June 1, 1963. And that is the day Kenya also joined the African Union. But it's also instructive then to step back and ask ourselves, what role did Kenya play in the terrain of what has been featured here heavily about Pan-Africanism? It has been clearly emphasized that Kenya's diplomacy is anchored in Pan-Africanism, among other principles. Here again, we can recall that Pan-Africanism movement started way back in the 1940s. And among the people who were shaping this Pan-Africanism was our own late Mr. Jomo Kenyatta, together with Haile Selassie, George Badimo, and Kwame Nkrumah. And coming down the line, it is from Pan-Africanism that the struggle for independence for Kenya was also inspired. And going down the line, the AU, when it was established, the principles that guided and shaped it were crafted by, among others, the Kenya then who were a liberation movement, but not yet attained independence. And so when the AU Charter was signed on the 25th May 1963, although Kenya did not sit at the table as an independent state, Kenya was in Addis as a nation that was just emerging. We have heard a lot about it. Now, going down the line, Kenya has also shaped the establishment of East African Community. And the history of East African Community goes back to 1922, 1948, 1961, when the East African Common Services was established under colonialism. But come 1967, Kenya was at the forefront in establishing the East African Community, which had shared services like railway services and the rest. And so Kenya has always been very much in the forefront of regional integration. Unfortunately, in 1977, the East African Community collapsed. And one of the reasons why the East African Community collapsed was economic ideological differences. And which I think is one of the lessons that we learned, because Kenya, having taken the right decision right from the beginning to remain non-aligned and not lean in any direction, whether east or west, East African Community was challenged because of ideology. And this was also at the time of great Cold War. But Kenya, having taken the right decision, Kenya then immediately after the collapse of East African Community went ahead to craft the now COMESA, which is the common market for Eastern and Southern Africa, way back from 1978 when the negotiation started, coming to 1981 when the preferential trade area was established, and now COMESA. Let's proceed. Now, where are we now? Having seen this, by the way, I should also mention one, and which has also been mentioned, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, which started as Intergovernmental Authority on Drought and Development in 1986, but transformed into Intergovernmental Authority in 1996. This Intergovernmental Authority, IGAD, has focused on peace and security, agriculture, environment, and economic and social cooperation. Now, what do we take from the lessons that we have seen here? First, these institutions have provided a framework for Kenya to participate in to be present in regional diplomacy. And in regional diplomacy, what have been some of the outcomes? You remember that way back in 1967, Kenya itself actually faced a territorial boundary dispute. And that was solved within the framework of the African Union. And this has also been very clearly outlined this morning by, among others, the Cabinet Secretary, who talked about the principle of respecting the decision of the African Union to uphold the boundaries of colonialism, even when Africa did not quite align itself to these boundaries, but decided for the sake of peace and security to safeguard. Kenya was a beneficiary of that, because if those of you remember the Shifta War, mediated by, among others, Zambia, that was one of the reasons why Kenya has also been a very strong and ardent defender of the principle of the territorial integrity. But what have been the outcome for Kenyans? And this is to me where I want to focus, because the outcome of this meeting is outcomes, lessons, misses, and hits. One, if you look at the issue of trade in goods and services, Kenya is a major exporter into the region. In fact, the region now has overtaken all markets in the world. Kenya is export destination is biggest into the region, not the rest of the world, but the region. I don't need to underline much more than that. But I should also mention something that is never emphasized enough here, and that is services. Kenya has been, and it has been outlined this morning, a center of education for many in the region, a center of health where people, in fact, where patients come into Nairobi for medical treatment, but also as a financial center, which has also been. But skills, and I want to talk about finance in 2 sentences. I'll be finishing in 2 minutes. In terms of services, you just introduced me as chairman of Equity Bank. Equity Bank today is invested in 7 countries. We never realized how much that sector, the service sector, is contributing to Kenya, but also skills that have been mentioned. If you run the region of Africa, you cannot go to any country in Africa without finding business skills. So Kenya has been playing a lot in that area. In terms of investment, I should also mention here that Safaricom is now going to Ethiopia, and we have others like Uganda and the rest. This is an area that I would like to suggest that as a lessons learned, we can open our fronts, not just for goods, but also services. Because sometimes I find Kenyans are very worried that we are net import of goods from some countries, but that shouldn't be a preoccupation. Let us also look at the totality, and we have also such services there. Kenya always and the rest that we can use to continue to advance our national interest.
Mr. Mwensha?
Yes, let me yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. The 5 minutes I added, you are finished.
Oh, you are giving me 5. I thought you meant an additional. Let me then finish here.
But before, Excellency, before you stop talking, there is one question I would want you to address because it's important within the context of Kenya's role in regional integration. And it is asked very many times by students. And this is the relationship between the RECs, regional economic communities, and the African Continental Free Trade Area. And the concern is that they are going back to the Abuja Treaty of 1994, which stated very clearly that the RECs were the ones who were supposed to progressively mature and become the building blocks of the continental economic community. And as they look around, and this is not a problem of Kenya alone, it's a problem for the region, they do not see RECs which can really be called strong building blocks. And so the question in their minds is, how do member states envisage to build an African continental free trade areas if the foundation is not strong enough? And of course, Kenya is part of that process. If you could just speak to that before you conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I will just underline, and that's a very important question. One, the continental free trade area is gradually taking shape, but it will take time before it is really effective on the ground because they have just finished the process of treaty making and also fundraising protocols, various protocols. Kenya is one of the countries that has also exported now under the continental free trade area and what is called guided trade. And you remember that Kenya was able to export tea to Ghana. And although it took a long time, but the process at least showed that it can work. And we know there is complementarity in terms of production that can be shared within the regions. Now, to answer your question, are these regional economic communities playing according to the playbook that they be ready to become part and parcel of the continent? The answer is simply yes. What is now being done, and this has also been done in our region, you remember the tripartite. This was realized, especially the struggle that was there between Copenhagen, SADC, and the East African community, that all of them were now established customs union. And no one country that belonged to two customs unions. But an agreement was reached to convert these customs unions. And now tripartite continental free trade area has also been agreed. Now, if these three have already united, and that was also only realized only about 6 months ago, 4 months ago, they have not yet even in fact launched it. It means now we have already 3 blocks that have already converged. And what is also being done, we've just had a meeting in Kigali where was agreed that these RECs should now converge towards the continental, for instance, things like rules of origin and other standards like payments and also connecting the continent. And so, yes, it is going in that direction. And with that, I think I would have wanted them to say a few things about the many institutions of regional integration which are in Kenya and which are contributing, like the financial institutions. One of the major ones that is in Kenya, the Trade and Development Bank, is contributing, in fact, if not millions, billions to the Kenyan economy. So regional integration is beneficial to Kenya, and the Kenya has been very effective, not only the host, but a participant of regional integration. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry, I'm talking from Chad, that's why it's been very difficult for us to be able to communicate together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can see Ambassador Bayer looking at me in a manner that suggests he also wants 5 minutes extra. I already introduced Ambassador Bayer to you. And if you look at the program, he's actually the one speaking to a complete overhaul, comprehensive review of where we came from in terms of becoming an independent country, and one with a strong foreign policy, and where we are. And I'm sure within that context, Ambassador Bayer will also tell us something about our notable achievements during that period, major diplomatic milestones. And of course, you'll be guided. He says he's now a scholar, so you'll be guided by the 3 outstanding themes of this conference: the hits, the misses, and the lesson. So that as you tell about us about the history, you touch on each one of those: the hits, the misses, and lesson. You have the floor, Ambassador Bayer. Can we clap for him?
Thank you very much. She forgot to introduce me by my real name, Bayer. Bayer means a bad person, but it doesn't mean so. It doesn't mean so in my language where I was given that name. It was a nickname for my great-great-grandfather, and it's since become a family name. So I go masquerading around as a good man when I'm actually a bad man. But I came with an assistant. This is the book Professor Nzomo referred to, Kenya's Foreign Policy and Diplomacy. So what I miss, please, the books are available, you can buy and you can read for yourself. They're outside, I'm told. The publisher is selling it there. Now, let us look at what I was asked to talk about. And I want to start by explaining how Kenya became a state, the establishment and recognition of Kenya as a state. And this was done under the 1933 Montevideo Convention, which defines what attributes a state will have. But not going into the details, we just want to say that we acquired 3 attributes as a state upon recognition. The first are rights. The rights we exercise as a state. The second are duties, which are also exercised by the state. And the third are obligations. And within this context, it was possible to formulate all policies for Kenya, not just foreign policy, all policies for Kenya. And they are governed by a very simple yet complicated term known as the national interest, which drives our policies in whatever field Kenya is involved in. So on attainment of statehood, that's what Kenya became. And that's how we began to develop a foreign policy that would enable the country participate in international affairs and also define what Kenya really is as a state. And the first pronouncement by the first prime minister of this country, the late Jomo Kenyatta, he later became president, was to declare that Kenya would pursue a non-aligned foreign policy. Why was it so? Because we were born at a time when there was very fierce competition between the Soviet Union and the United States, the East-West, or the Cold War, if you want to call it. He wanted a situation where Kenya would participate and relate, also benefit from either side, without preferring one over the other. Of course, in terms of practice, there were preferences in terms of the economic policy we adopted, for instance, the National Paper number 10 of 1965. And I want to emphasize that that particular paper also was the first codification of Kenya's foreign policy, because the section on foreign policy defines who we relate to, how, and in what manner. And we have never deviated from that path. That path has helped the country win friends, win institutions to be hosted here, UoN being one of them, Habitat being another. And I think the PS in the morning talked about late Ambassador Joseph Odero Joey. That was a man who was consulted by the United States and Soviet Union alike during the time we were fighting to get UNEP and Habitat hosted here. That was the man of the time. We also have people like Ambassador Burudi Nabwera, the first ambassador to the United Nations and also to the United States of America. He's the only one, as far as I know, whom the Americans allowed to sit in New York and represent the country as Kenya's first ambassador to Washington. He's still alive. He's about 97 years old. We had a conversation with him about 6 months ago. He's still very sharp, just as fresh. And I think those are some of the people that the ministry should try and reach out and gain from their experience in terms of what was done. So yes, it is important to go back to history, but that should be able to teach us how we move on from there to what we want to become. Odero Joey was responsible, principally, for bringing UNEP to Nairobi. And at the time the conference took place in Stockholm, Sweden, Ambassador Joseph Muliro was ambassador in Sweden at that time, hosted the whole world once Mzee Kenyatta accepted to host the UNEP in Nairobi. So those are milestones. We were able to do it because we were able to talk to the West, we were able to talk to the East Bloc, we were able to marshal support from the group of 77 plus China, the global South. And I think we need to keep all those things in mind in whatever actions we take, so that Kenya does not lose track and does not lose friends. It's not necessary to compete with the big powers. We don't have the capacity, we don't have the military might to project our influence in the world, but we have the power of persuasion, diplomatic persuasion, to keep friends with us. Now, I want to say that Kenya also navigated its way at the end of the Cold War. Those are just the milestones. How did we navigate the way? One, it was very difficult. It had become very difficult for the traditional economic partners to continue supporting Kenya the same way they had done before. The current Prime Cabinet Secretary knows. He used to come to our stations as Minister for Finance. It was a very difficult situation where he would actually be talking to officers from those countries as Minister for Finance. It was a very painful exercise. But because it was felt that Kenya had neglected the democratic path. And I think President Moi was very strong on what Kenya wanted to be as an independent country. But that put us into problems. But the other reason was because of the end of the Cold War, former Central European countries had become independent and they needed support. And I think their brothers in the West preferred to support them to supporting countries like Kenya. And that's what made the drying up of resources become a reality, and because it was very difficult for Kenya to continue the same way we had done. So we had to change tact. We had started developing what you call Look East foreign policy. And it was started by President Moi. He was the fourth president to visit Beijing after Richard Nixon. That's when Kasarani was built and a number of other projects became realizable. So it is important for us to remember what may have happened. But significantly, session paper number 10 established three things. One, the foreign policy of this country. Two, the economic policy of this country, and how we were going to behave to relate both in the region as well as internationally. And if we lose sight of that, then we are losing sight of where we came from. And it will be very difficult for us to claim the leadership role that Kenya has maintained since that time. So the Cold War helped us chart our way, but ourselves became also proactive. As I conclude, I'll summarize the four administrations since independence, so that we see which administration did what, in what area, and how. So the fourth milestone was the fight for multi-party. And I'm sure those of you who have followed Kenya's history, it was a brutal war in a way, but one that was worth it. It resulted in the 2010 Constitution that has established a machinery, a framework in which our foreign policy operates. Chapter 1 of that Constitution says all foreign policy matters become part of the provision of this Constitution. So whatever we do, we need to take into account, apart from being good friends with the countries outside Kenya, we are also acting within the law. So it is that will make us move forward as a country. It is that will make us realize the potential that we have in formulating policies for the future. I think Dr. Juma summarized and outlined what we need to do to be able to continue on a path of progress in foreign policy. So in summary, just to finish my presentation and avoid clash with Professor Nzomo, I want to say this. Kenyatta's government, Jomo Kenyatta's government, focused on two things. One was the building of a nation. And two, the establishment of institutions of governance, which have held this country to this day. And we need to improve on them. The review of the foreign policy issue comes as a result of that. Moi government followed what he called Nyayo. Nyayo means following the footsteps of the first president. He never rattled the boat, but instead he continued to build the nation and he continued to support institutions of governance. Mwai Kibaki came to power at a very critical time, because I think there was already a clash of ideas between the ruling party and the opposition. But he adopted a policy of focusing on economic nationalism of this country, which again goes to support the three legs of national power: diplomacy, military, and the economy. And the economy was thriving. That's how we were able to fund, even expand the diplomatic missions, because they started expanding that time. And Uhuru Kenyatta government was preoccupied, firstly, with the ICC issues, and which were navigated, I think, conclusively, effectively, because apart from the disruption they caused, there is nothing really too much that came out of them. And after that, he followed the Look-East policy that had been consolidated by Mwai Kibaki in terms of infrastructural development and economic development. Now we are in the fifth segment of our government, and we are seeing changes. Again, there is emphasis in going back to traditional partners, but we are not ignoring the new partners that were secured during Kibaki time. So there are a lot of things to learn from the history. Since I was asked to talk about evolution, I cannot go into the analysis, but I think you should be able to pick up from there what we did succeed in and what we did not. Just to emphasize what Professor Nzomo said. We started the exercise of documenting Kenya's foreign policy, and the intention was to publish it during Kibaki's time, but it didn't happen. It was published, I think, during Uhuru's time. Now we have reviewed it. What we need to look at the foreign policy is to make it a live document which will enable us navigate through the stormy waters of international relations. There is a very thin line between entry and exit points of any foreign policy, because you are dealing with the external environment, you are dealing with treaties, you are dealing with conventions, you are dealing with independent actors out there. It is not something you can legislate. It is something you have to respond to in terms of how you manage to convince them to continue being Kenya's friends. I want to end there, and thank you very much.
Can we give him another clap for him? Now, boss, but I did mention one important thing. He is also a doctoral degree student in my class. And therefore, I'm allowed to ask him to focus his remark, at least on one very important issue. Please be coming as I speak. And I'm saying this on behalf of the many of our students who are here. Please, you are an expert in this area. Help us understand what Kenya and other African countries have benefited from the WTO-led Doha round, which, as you know, has been going on since 2002. It was supposed to be completed within 3 years. Now we are in 2024, so that is a total of 22 years, and we have not seen very tangible outcomes. I am sure you are the right person to help all of us to understand that. And the related question is about the conference, the ministerial conference of WTO, which was held here in 2015. Some would want to know what were the benefits arising out of hosting that conference, and the many other things you wanted to say in that time. Please. And we clap for him again.
Thank you, Professor Nsomo. And just to give a disclaimer that she is my professor together with Professor Maluki, and therefore, if I make many mistakes, she takes that bit of it. So, Prime Cabinet Secretary and distinguished guests, the PS, colleague ambassadors, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked to talk about Kenya's role in international trade, the case study of the WTO. But because of the interest of time, and as you have heard, I'm an aspiring scholar, I intend to publish this paper elsewhere, so details will be available on request. But I'm going to cover roughly the following areas. One is the introduction to this paper, the origins of the WTO, Kenya's engagement in WTO negotiations, Kenya's successes in multilateral trade, as Professor Nzomo has requested that I do, and challenges in Kenya's trade diplomacy, and the conclusions. I will learn very fast because I intend to use the knowledge that I have of least developing countries as they agitated for preferential treatment in forums like this, and therefore I demand my extra 5 minutes. Well, the journey for Kenya's international trade has run for the last 60 years. And for the longest time that we know, Kenya's interests in the GATT, in the Uruguay route, preceding the establishment of the WTO, were taken care of by Britain as the colonial power. So indirectly we participated in the negotiations. And from what I have gathered, one of the luminaries, I think I asked Ambassador Bayer in our forum, Ambassador Najero, I hear he is in New York. We should look for him because he served as the chair of the General Council of the WTO. But others did, including Ambassador Amina Mohammed and the others. So we can trace the origin of the WTO to the failure by the United States Congress to ratify the Havana Charter. We had another charter before that established the UoN, and the Havana Charter failed to get the Congress approval, and that is how the International Trade Organization failed to take off. So after that, an institution was established which was called the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. This was the GATT. And the GATT had several rounds. It took almost 50 years for GATT to complete its work. So the notable routes which preceded the establishment of the WTO were routes like the Kennedy route, the Tokyo route, and the Uruguay route. There are a few instances outside what this GATT did, outside the area of tariffs and trade, but the most important one was the Uruguay route that gave developing countries the rights to agitate for special and differential treatment. And Your Excellency, special and differential treatment is the special treatment given to least developing countries to get better trading terms and better treatment from the global trading partners. And this has been the hallmark of Kenya's economic and commercial diplomacy. I would want to digress a bit and talk about the Constitution. In Schedule 4 of the Constitution, especially the first part of Schedule 4, together with the former Foreign Minister, Honorable Wetangula, we crafted a strategy for the sharing of national functions in the Constitution. And if you read the Constitution, the first part talks about foreign policy, foreign trade, and foreign relations. That was the submissions that we made to the Eminent Persons Group, the committee that was led by Nzaba Kitonga. And therefore, at that time, we were convinced that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that was going to be formed after the new constitution was going to be the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Relations. And that is the portfolio that Honorable Amina Mohammed took over in 2013. International trade, yes. Foreign affairs and international trade. So, what are the critical things that we can remember about the WTO? Kenya joined the ACP group, the African, Caribbean, and the Pacific group, as part of the hegemony that was created by the British and the French to agitate for their rights under the Article 131 of the Rome Treaty. And this formed the basis of Kenya's trade policy or economic diplomacy as we know it today. All the preferences that we have enjoyed from the Lome Convention, Lome 1, 2, 3, and 4, to the Cotonou Agreement, and now the Samoa Agreement, are premised on the preferences granted to the ACP. And not just the ACP, the alliance created by the ACP in following the WTO rules. That is very important because these exemptions have seen us go to international dispute resolution processes. The Caribbean countries, Mexico, Venezuela, Guatemala, and so on, sued us in the international, in the WTO, and that waiver was done away with. So that was how the economic partnership agreements came into being, into saying that are we compliant with WTO, especially Article 24 and the related FMFN and the national treatment rules. We have had our own share of leadership roles in the WTO. I had mentioned the role played by Ambassador Najila, Ambassador Dirango, Ambassador Nzomo here during their days in Geneva, and many others, in promoting Kenya as a speaking voice for the developing countries at the WTO. I will speak to that later. Running quickly, in the interest of time, the first ministerial conference that happened after the WTO was in Singapore. And in Singapore, they isolated 4 issues. These were, and I'm going to come to them later, trade and investment, trade and competition policy, trade facilitation, whose agreement was later signed in Nairobi, and the trade and transparency in government procurement. Government procurement to date has not been agreed. It's still a plurilateral agreement between the willing countries and the agreement on civil aviation. Those are the only 2 issues that have not been agreed by all the members of the WTO. The rest have been. One important meeting that Ambassador Nzomo asked me to talk about is the Doha Round. But the Doha Round, the background to the Doha Round is the Seattle meeting, which collapsed and which was led by the late Nicholas Biwott in the walkout that happened. And Nicholas Biwott played a very important role because he prepared the protest document and handed over to the chairman of the African Union, then the OAU, which was Ghana or Egypt, and that led to the collapse of the meeting. And Ambassador Dirago is guilty of crafting that particular protest note. So what happened in Doha was a consequence of what had happened earlier in Seattle, because the developing countries were protesting that they have not received fair treatment for from the rich countries. And this is how the 21 issues were crafted. And the 21 years later, these issues, some of them have been addressed, but the most important one, Your Excellency, has been the granting of trade preferences to least developed countries. I was asked by one of the journalists yesterday, because President Biden is in Angola, and the Chinese are reacting to that visit. What is Kenya's take on that? And I asked, what is China's alternative view to the preferences granted to African countries? Because China committed to giving African countries $10 billion worth of trade finance. Where is it? China committed to giving 5 billion shillings in the Dakar agreement. Where is it? So we were saying, if we can leverage on the East policy, but with a determination to take these guys on their word, I think we can make it, because that is where the international trade meets diplomacy. If you take people on their word, they say we shall do this, and it's signed, and then they don't. The interests of the developing countries in the WTO and elsewhere, and that is how UNCTAD was formed. UNCTAD was formed because the developing countries felt that WTO was not good enough for them, but they failed to establish a mechanism of giving the resolutions of UNCTAD a meaningful international law space in terms of anchoring their demands. Quickly, the Doha round was followed by the Hong Kong round. It became another sticky point for the developing countries. And Kenya, again, played a very important role in the formulation of the resolutions in the Hong Kong round. Let me quickly go to the Nairobi conference of 2015. And I here want to pay special attention to my former boss, Monica, and many colleagues who helped us formulate and host that conference, including Ambassador Tom Amoro, who is not here with us, Ambassador Dirago, and so on. So there were three important takeaways from the Nairobi conference, just to answer Ambassador Nzomo's query. There was issue of the removal of export subsidies, the issue of public stock holding, and this is an important thing, Your Excellency, because in the Bali meeting, in the WTO, the developed countries committed to reducing export subsidies for agricultural products by 50%. Why haven't we taken them on? I dare ask. We should, because if they continue subsidizing agricultural subsidies, and they had committed themselves, then our fruits, our vegetables that we pride ourselves in will never get a market in those countries. We should take them on, I believe so, in a diplomatic way. In the Nairobi meeting also, we discussed about domestic support. This is support for the economy. And I want to thank Mheshimiwa David Ochieng, who came up with the Trade Remedies Act of 2017 that said if a country is suffering injury from exports, then it has a duty to protect those exports. So we should do that with our milk, so that we protect our farmers, our dairy farmers, from exports from our neighboring countries, eggs, and so many other products that are spoiling our economy. We have the legal framework for granting that remedy to the Kenyan economic actors. Let me go quickly to, by the way, I forgot to mention that you served as the Minister for Surprise and Marketing. During that time, you also interacted with the issues of trade. In my paper, I have given you special recognition because alongside with Mukiza Kitui, the late Kirugi Mutomkindia, Amos Kemunya, you laid the framework for Kenya's trade policy, and we want to thank you very much for that. I have talked about the, may I issue the special treatment? It is granted. So, Your Excellency, I want to give a practitioner's view of the challenges facing trade diplomacy. I have been a practitioner in that field. I served as the Director of Economic Affairs. And this is exactly what I have come up with. That trade generally has a very limited negotiation capacity. And I hope the Foreign Service Academy will take it upon itself to train negotiators in trade. The other request that I might make is strengthening our mission to Geneva. Our mission in Geneva, your PS is here. The experience I had when I was the Principal Secretary for Trade was that that mission requires strengthening. You may put us together somehow, and I'm very thankful for the way you have done with the health diplomacy. You may attempt to make the same way with the strengthening of the mission in Geneva, because what comes out of the mission in Geneva is very critical for this country. So countries like Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, Namibia, and others have specific ambassadors to the WTO. Specific ambassadors to the WTO. Your Excellency, it would be a good thing to think of these young and upcoming officers. And I'm not campaigning for them, but they are due to be appointed as ambassadors to the WTO. One thing that I may also point out is the strengthening of the commercial section, the economic and commercial diplomacy. There is a tiff with the Ministry of Trade, but that can be sorted out because we all work for this republic. But they don't have representation in every embassy. Therefore, you need to train these young people in the academy so that they can adopt the Indian principle of all-round people, all-rounded officers who can handle these things. It doesn't make sense to me to concentrate very much on immigration. We should concentrate more on economic and commercial diplomacy, because that is what is going to push this country forward in terms of negotiating for opportunities, for creating greater economic power for Kenya. Because Ambassador Baya said, next to the military, next to the diplomacy, the next economic thing that this country needs is economic power. We need to also focus on integration. Ambassador Mwencha mentioned about integration. And integration is based on WTO. There is no integration that is outside the WTO law. Hakuna, even one, because your leads being taken to the international dispute resolution system. So if we have strengthened our way into the tripartite free trade area, Your Excellency, let Kenya produce the first Secretary General of the tripartite free trade area. That is the way Kenya is going to show its leadership in economic and commercial diplomacy. We should also insist on a lot of capacity building. And Your Excellency, because you are the Prime Cabinet Secretary, please use your powers to give higher budget to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I've not been sent by the PS, but I know without a strong foreign ministry, budget-wise, Kenya will not shine as expected. I hope in the next coming budget, there will be enough resources. We had attempted when you were there, but we didn't succeed. But the overall budget of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs requires a lot of boosting so that these trained officers, all of them, can realize their potential and the training they have acquired over time. Let me conclude by making a few recommendations. One, can the ministry establish a role of honor for Kenya's trade leaders? A role of honor. I visited the United States Trade Representative Office, and they do have such a role of honor, a hall of fame. And therefore, we can have people who have served in Kenya's trade-wise. I want to let the cat off the bag because Ambassador Juma and I were the architects of the Kenya-US Free Trade Area Agreement negotiations. We convinced President Kenyatta to start it. He was very adamant about it. He faced a lot of opposition from Mukiza Kitui, from Mwencha, from Fera Songwe, and we convinced him that it was the right thing to do. Why? Because we had education on our side and intellectual arguments on our side. So, please take it upon yourself. Because we did negotiate with Trump, and now he is in power, we can conclude those agreements. I talked about training program for trade negotiators. I talked about strengthening of partnerships with international organizations, especially the ones based in New York and in Geneva. We need to integrate academic trade diplomacy in academic curricula, professor. It is important for the University of Nairobi to introduce a module of trade diplomacy in the University of Nairobi, which is my alma mater. And we need to advocate for regional solidarity within the EAC. The EAC is our baby. It is our focal point. It is our savior. And the only thing that Kenya can get out of the EAC is its adherence to the WTO. You know, we have been taken to court in Arusha at Article 37 of the Customs Treaty. Why can't we defend, and we are ready to defend, these arguments wherever required? I want to stop there, Your Excellency, and say that the journey this country has walked. Kenya does not have minerals, doesn't have oil, doesn't have gold. It only has people and trade. Nothing else. And I believe that if Kenya is going to become what it said in the Vision 2030, a developed country with the highest standards of living, our only solution is trade. Thank you very much, and may God bless you.
Well done.
And can we give him another clap? Thank you very much. And if you allow me, let me abuse my pass as a moderator a little bit. On that one point, Excellency Prime Cabinet Secretary, on the capacity building for the Geneva mission, it is absolutely crucial. I was there for 3 years as ambassador, and I noted that actually we had a very, very thin capacity, even in terms of skills, never mind the numbers. Many of our officers have not been trained for negotiations at the WTO, and they can get very complex and very economistic, and the language can be sometimes almost it's like you're hearing English, but it's in Greek somehow. And so much more serious, focused training. And by the way, it wasn't just Kenya. Many, even ambassadors, many of them, they avoided going to the WTO because of the language of negotiation. Very, very technical, and it requires people who are very well trained in order to really be effective in negotiating for their countries. So I just wanted to add that because it's a very important element, and I saw it firsthand when I was there. And without further ado, I want now to call the last speaker, who is with us here. You are last but not the least. You are equally important, just that we had to do somebody had to be the last one. I didn't have any choice. So I can apologize to you later, but please for now, just come. And Ambassador Philip As he go, and please welcome him with a clap. He has been very patient. And he's talking to us about the future of diplomacy in the era of technology acceleration. Karibu.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be very quick. I'd sent a lot of slides, so you'll get the slides when they cannot keep up. So I've mixed them a bit, so please don't follow the flow. I think very quickly, Prime Cabinet Secretary, of course, and the wisdom of His Excellency the President, recognized that technology is shaping how we live, learn, work, communicate, engage. And I've had all the presentations, and in my head I kept on wondering, where is the place of technology? And so we know now that we have three broad accelerations, right? So climate, demography, Gen Zs, I can see you at the corner there, and technology. Those are the three accelerations. So when I talk about trade, we're seeing technology. When I talk about the country, we're seeing technology. And when I talk about even how we engage, we're seeing technology. Even in terms of when I talk about regional integration, one thing that technology has done is, of course, is we live in a globalized world, that our borders are challenged. The complexities of our times have exceeded the complexities of our minds, because that's what we're seeing in the era of technology. We're seeing new behaviors. Gen Zs, again, when I talk about technology, I have to look at you. They take photo of their food before they eat. I still have to understand what that is. They live a very public life. They are borderless. They're Kenyans on X, Kenyans on Facebook. I mean, it's a new country out there that we have to manage physically, yet lives in a virtual world. They are the youngest, median age of 19. Some are digital first, mobile only. I can see them waving there. They've never seen any other thing other than gadgets. So when you talk about telex, faxes, they don't understand what you're talking about. Which means out of the 8 billion population we have, about 66% are on the internet. Majority is these guys. About 69% are on mobile. Majority are them owning even 2 mobile phones, if I'm not wrong. And so it means in the era of technology, we have a new term called techplomacy, which means we have to deal with the element of technology in the hands of young people, but also deal with the creators of technology, which are the companies that are creating the technology, which we have to treat them as countries. And so globally, we have now 21 countries that have tech ambassadors, all of them in the global north. Kenya, the only one in the global south. And when I said the importance of techplomacy, just to give you a context, Kenya's GDP is about $130 billion. Apple valuation is $2.7 trillion. Amazon valuation is $1.3 trillion. Remember your GDP? Remember that? Meta, $811 billion. So your GDP is still 113. So how do you not deal with Meta, Alphabet, Apple as a country? And so that's what you're dealing with right now. And so that's why technology is important. Of course, historical influences, diplomats have always used communication tools, even though the internet has brought in new other platforms like X, to the credit of His Excellency, the first president ever to engage on X Spaces. It's changing, right? And so those are the new tools that diplomats have to use. Of course, there's a new policy topics. Last I checked, 50 new diplomatic policy topics to engage in. 50. Are current diplomats capable of doing that? Food for thought, especially for the universities and institutions of learning. When I say topics, means cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, quantum, microchips, semiconductors. Are the universities hearing me? Do you teach that in diplomacy? Are you sure? Last I checked, I didn't see any. Just a point of notification. Even the digital tools, is there a workshop for using Facebook? X, LinkedIn. These are the challenges you're getting, that the new tools that we're engaging in do not have forum and frameworks for engagement and education. So we need to rethink how we educate within the diplomatic space. Then, of course, the complexity when I hear regional integration, trade wars, trade negotiations, is, of course, the digital geopolitics. And I think Ambassador Juma and myself are always in the front line of this. Because the new war or the new nuclear weapons or the new force of power is technology. And so technology is not neutral in a way that we have to engage within the geopolitics of it, which means you have to understand how to negotiate technology. We do not own the fiber cables that come into our country. We do not own the satellites that beam internet into the country. So we need to be able to negotiate in a way that then we go to the bold vision that Ambassador Juma mentioned, that we need to be creators of technology and not users of technology. And so how we go into the context of the hits and misses, I think for us we are more on the hits and less the misses, because it's still an opportunity to shape the future of technology and how we craft that. And how are we doing that? One, of course, is if you are following the state visit, it was very important for Kenya to engage with the United States around technology, because that's where a lot of the technologies companies are. It's very important for me to remember the Prime Cabinet Secretary mentioned, why does the president travel? We did a state visit in the US. We did a roadshow in the US around technology, even visited the heart of technology, which was Silicon Valley, which means you have to treat those countries, those companies, at the level of countries, which is why the head of state had to engage. What has been the benefits of that? Very quickly, Kenya is the first country to engage at the spaces where the other countries don't, in the African context. Whether it's the G7, when His Excellency was part of the G7 this year, I followed up in the ministerial meeting, whether in the UoN AI advisory body, whether in the international network of AI safety institutes. Kenya has always been leading. Whether it's to negotiate around chips and microchips and semiconductors, Kenya is the first country to do that. Whether it's being the Silicon Savannah, inviting all technology companies, they're all here. There's no other country in this continent where all those hubs are concentrated. Guess what? They're closing somewhere else and coming to Kenya. So we must be doing something right in terms of our investment, but also our posture around reflecting the capability, which means the investments that we're doing well around connectivity, around talent, especially the new universities like the Open University in Konza, whether it's in terms of an enabling business environment and the importance of democracy. And we do not value this because democracy, technology doesn't thrive without democracy. Or whether it's shaping the future of industry in terms of the new airlifts, of sending students to emerging economies to learn new skills and trades around material sciences, which is interesting. I was in Stanford last week. We have a lot of Kenyans there. So I think there's sort of good things that we're doing in terms of how we're shaping the future of democracy, and I shape the future of technology, and I put them around 4 pieces. 1, talent. Again, homegrown talent, important to do that, but let's also figure out the diaspora, and I see PS Njogu here, in terms of talent that already exists. So how do we harness that in the way that can begin to accelerate the industry, even as we build a pipeline of talent through our universities? Data, with the Data Protection Commissioner. Data is a new oil. Oil is a bad word to use, maybe to say it's a new water, but that's what builds the future of industry. So Kenya is doing very well in that, to the extent of we have a data commissioner, but also will be the first country with an adequacy dialogue capability with the EU in terms of unlocking data flows between the EU and Kenya. Green digital economy with green data centers. 92% of our energy is green, which means anything that comes here is already offset. And so I think in that particular area we're doing very well. Supply chain diversification in terms of just the ecosystem. In closing, because we're doing very well in that, I think Prime Cabinet Secretary, my 2 requests. The 3rd secretaries. We need a fellowship between the 3rd secretaries, 2 tech companies, and tech companies into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So those are the two pieces. Let me repeat. We need talent in terms of fellowship to move across the Foreign Service and the tech companies. I've talked to them, don't worry. They will accept it. It's just this side that needs to reciprocate. The second bit is investing in the Foreign Service in two parts. We've done very well through the leadership of the PS by putting a community of practice between tech talent in very specific missions: Geneva, New York, LA, and Brussels. So we have a community of practice around tech-driven deployments, and we've seen the results. And I really want to thank the Prime Cabinet Secretary, because tomorrow we'll be launching the first ever artificial intelligence playbook for diplomats globally. It's never been done. And this is ingrown, inbuilt from the service together with tech companies. And so if we can we invest in skilling around talent in technology, especially with the topics. In Vienna, they will need nuclear and technology, right? In Rome, they will need food and tech. You know, in all your missions, they'll need plus tech. So please, if we can invest in that. The second one is to invest in the tools themselves. Emails, document management systems, new tools. We are happy to support even new chat capabilities in terms of GPTs for foreign service. So we're even exploring that, because we've seen the challenges you're mentioning around trade and trade negotiations is no one particular human being has all the capabilities to negotiate on trade. It's not possible. But that's what artificial intelligence can do. So if we invest in the tools, then we have AI plus a negotiator who can then help that. So that's something that I think we have capacity to do, but we need the investments to do that so that people can be trained on. So we are piloting something in New York around negotiating. We use that in New York to negotiate on behalf of G77 for the first ever AI resolution at the United Nations. We led that with the US. Magdila Dizier can confirm that. The second one we led, of course, was G77 and China negotiations on behalf of that group for the Global Digital Compact. We did that because we had the capabilities of AI, but it was quick investment, not resilient. So I think we've seen the possibility. Of course, Mark's team sent 30 people. We don't have 30 warm bodies, but with AI, I think we can do that. And so with that, thank you very much.
Well done.
Ambassador, I wanted to shake your hand, but you... Well done, well done. What a panel. What a wealth of knowledge. It was worth waiting, and we apologize, Your Excellency. I know you have gone beyond the time we were allowed. Thank you for being patient. But would you have missed this for anything? Can we clap for this? Thank you. And at that point, my job is done here. I'll now be deferring to the corporate office of the University of Nairobi to take over. And thank you so much. And to see you now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Nzomo. Before they leave, can I ask you to please stand here and take a photo? Do we have our photographers? Maybe, yes. It was a very powerful panel. Let's capture that. PS, could you join them? If you don't mind. Okay. As we are doing that, we are going to call the next panel. Please come for that photo opportunity.